Yo, yo, it is review time. We've got Opus 17 here, and I am joined by the wonderful Eureka Wallace, Mr. Eureka himself. Jared, how are you, sir?
I'm good. How about you?
I'm doing well. Happy to, it's always fun to review a new set of cards. So, little housekeeping things to get out of the way before we jump into it. I want to give a thanks to Mysidia Gaming for the thumbnails you'll see for this video. Man loves his War of the Visions, and there's a lot of War of the Visions characters in here. Check out his channel if you want to learn anything about that game. Also, want to thank Blink and Yosiza for helping me get the starter cards. The starter cards were not uploaded to the card browser, so if the images I have are maybe kind of fuzzy or something wrong, sorry, kind of grabbed what I could. Other than that, yeah. Oh, I do want to say, too, sometimes depending on when the set is released and the cards, this review is completely just, here's what I think about these cards. However, in this case, and maybe it's the same for you, Jared, some of these cards I have already gotten to play test and play with. So some of them I will have some firsthand experience with. Others not. I'll try to mention when I do have one. Otherwise, we'll just kind of have to go with that. I assume you had some testing as well.
Just a little bit.
Yeah. Perfect. And then if you haven't seen one of these before, certain cards I will skip past. We won't talk because some of them are just like copies of other characters in the same element. So, but let's get right to it. So, first off, in fire for Opus 17, we have Adelard. Interesting that it's Kuchaspel on a forward. So now you don't have to tap that back up. You can just have this guy completely, have that effect. To me, that's probably the best part of him. I don't know about the doubling the ability. I've personally never felt in fire that, man, I just can't do enough damage. There's just not enough damage, especially with Jin last set. I just haven't seen that issue, so I can't picture. I mean, granted, the idea of having Squall now do 8k or, 10k or whatever on his initial attack seems awesome, but I don't know. He's kind of there for me.
Yeah, I actually really quite like this card. So the first big thing to note is that it's not quite Kuchaspel. It only works for abilities, so it doesn't stop Rydia from it doesn't allow you to Brynhilde Rydia or anything like that, which is is relevant, and especially in some of the monofire control decks that you might be acquainted that were something that was pretty big in the meta back from Opus 13 and before, but not so much onwards. And maybe I guess Opus 14 and early Opus 15 had some EX focused monofire control.
Yeah,
but it doesn't quite synergize in those decks as much as Kuchaspel. It's not as comprehensive, I should say. However, it does work with a lot of the things that are going to matter for these kinds of abilities. It is going to allow you to Ranjit, or you get Cyan through a Minmood board or a Cecil board, and that is pretty important. I do think that the doubling is a little bit better than I give it credit for, particularly with some of the cards that we did see in those older monofire control decks, like Blaze or Rain. So some of these cards, on the turn that they come out, they hit 2 targets in particular, benefit a lot. And
Ifrit, another one.
It's important to note that, yes, yeah, sure, Ifrit as well. It's important to note that for the 2 fire, even if he's removed, you're still going to double the damage. It just puts that effect into the air, basically, until the end of the turn. So killing the Adelard on top of it isn't going to punish you if you're going to remove them anyways. So I do really quite like the card. I'm not really sure how many copies we're going to see across the meta. I'm not really sure it's going to be a staple, but I do think if you are playing monofire control in these kinds of lists, it is going to be something that you consider throughout your deck building. Additionally, obviously it's FFB, and it works well with Glacial, who we're going to talk about it eventually, but let's use S abilities for crystals instead. It's a solid S ability to use there. Not really anything more than Glacial is doing in the first place, so it's not a huge bonus synergy, but if you were playing a fire, water, crystal deck, then you might consider that synergy for it as well.
Good insight. Okay, so I know it's early, but I gotta do a little mini rant on this next card. So this is one I've played. This is the one deck I tested more than any other in the short time I've had, which is Cat 6. Final Fantasy 6 is one of my favorite games. It's probably my second favorite FF game of all time. And I have to compare it to Glaciella because it's very similar, the idea of this alternative way to pay specials. However, whereas she feels very smooth and supported, he has felt very awkward every time I've played him. He's a very small body, so he dies to Amaterasu. he's very vulnerable to Mist Dragon when they, you know, I have tried to have him enter before, like, okay, cool, remove all the cards you were going to get. It's like, cool, I just paid 5 for nothing. And then unlike Glaciella, which just has a field effect, which you can instantly use the crystals, Edgar creates a stack. And I didn't realize that until I went to do it. And I was like, okay, give Sabin the ability. And my opponent said, cool, before Sabin gets that ability, kill Sabin with this thing. I was like, oh, okay, well, I guess I'll do nothing then. And it's disappointing to see Brave Exvius get so much support. I think there were 8 new cards that had special abilities, not to mention all the old ones, and we only got 3 total new cards in 6 with specials this set, which is Typhon, Setzer, and Sabin. So it's just like, I don't know. I love the art, I love the mono art, and I love 6. And he's called Edgar, and the backup Edgar was such a nice I don't know, just playing him. Sure. I really wanted to love this card, but I feel very let down after trying it. Do you feel any different?
Yeah, I think the text on the card is really powerful, and when you can utilize all of the text, it is, you know, up there with Glaciella, but you definitely hit the nail on the head here. It is very limited mechanically. They could have just said, instead of, you know, this 0 action ability that goes on the stack, they could have just said the first time you use a special ability for a 6 each turn, you can do it instead. But they did kind of make it very awkward and difficult to resolve this profitably. Like, they could have made this a 3 CP 7k that only gets back 1 instead, and that would have probably been a lot better, because then it's not nearly as difficult to resolve, and it's not nearly as much of a blowout against cards like, you know, Mist Dragon or White Mage and stuff like that. And that's it is quite sad, I want to say, that 6 is kind of being treated like this. It is nice that it got support at all, and, you know, Fire Ice 6 hasn't really been a serious consideration for a deck in quite a long time. It's been fringe playable for a long time, and this might bring it up to a higher tier. And, you know, who knows, by the end of the set we could be talking about a 6 deck being great. But Edgar does seem to be kind of limited mechanically compared to, you know, the kind of text that Glaciella has, which just makes it so much smoother.
Yeah, absolutely. So next we have Elf, which is just a home run for Avalanche support. He's an Avalanche operative. He's an EX burst. He's a fire backup, which, depending on who you ask, makes it either terrible or amazing. I guess it just depends on how you feel about it. His action ability's fine. It's kind of just, I guess, there to clear up space. I can't really see you ever using that, but the idea that you can just have this and Kolka down and you can still get your reduction for all your Avalanche forwards, I don't see how you don't slot this in an Avalanche deck. It can easily replace the Meath because it basically does the same thing, so it just seems like a home run in my book.
Yeah, I actually think this is one of the best cards in the set, probably. It's obviously just fantastic for Avalanche. It fixes so many problems. You get to search for Avalanches. You discard it. Has EX Burst for, like, no reason. Yeah. It's breakable. You know, it really does it all. And having an Avalanche backup that isn't named Biggs, Wedge, Jesse, Barrett, Tifa is, like, so big for these decks, because it just immediately brings down the cost of the 3 main party attacking Avalanche members to 1. And even though it's a fire backup, which, you know, let's be real, that's, like, the only thing that is making this card that keeps this card a step away from totally busted. Yeah. Right. Yeah, it's great. And not only that, it's probably the best backup searcher that you could ask for. Even if you're not playing an Avalanche deck, this card can search for Biggs, Wedge, which there's plenty of backups for. Can search for Jesse, which is just the generic 7 searcher. Yeah. So if you're playing Fire Earth, I think this is also just, you know, outside of Avalanche, the best backup searcher. And I think if other jobs had this backup searcher, they would be the best backup searchers in their respective elements. You know, they're very. I think this card is close to as good as Amber, just as, like, a random backup searcher that has EX for, you know, no reason. So I really hope we get more of these in the future. You know, maybe for, you know, job Sky Pirates. You know, card named Redis or something like that. You know, I wouldn't be opposed. But yeah, I think we're gonna see a lot of this card and this type of effect being very powerful in the future.
Nailed it. All right, next we have Garland. He's just kind of pack fodder. Move past him.
Sure.
Here we have King, which is the start of, I don't know what Type 0 did to Hobby Japan as a game, but they seem, this is the start of a lot of cards in this set that are somehow worse than way older cards, or at least just equal to them, which is just baffling. Like, this isn't even better than the Opus 9 King, which you can play for free, or play at a cheaper count. Like,
for
his effects are so weak. I don't get it. I don't get it.
Yeah, I think they used Type 0 and Pictologica cards as their punching bag, their pack fodder, their draft commons. And, in draft, this card is still not very good, but it's at least playable, perhaps in that kind of environment. But yeah, no, it's... I don't even... Like, most of these Class 0, or maybe even all of these Class 0 cards, aren't even making the cut in title. So
yeah.
I don't...
And that's sad, and that's a theme we'll see. But who they do love is their Samurai. And here we have Gosetsu. We have a forward version this time, no longer on the backup. I've already gotten to see it in play. I've gotten to see what Samurais can do. Finally, they have a card in Element that can pull back the Tenzin. That was always the limit, is you had your 3 Tenzin, and hey, if you're like me and 2 of them go to damage immediately, well, you're out of luck. Nope, for once, Gosetsu can pull them back. I almost overlooked the 1,000 Brave, too, because I thought, that's not relevant. Like, they're already big and they're already brave. But it does make a difference for something like Hien going from 8 to 9 that you can't Amaterasu and kill him anymore. Some other things. So just flat out great. I've heard a few people say, but you lose the backup EX searcher, which is fair, but I don't know, man. Seeing this guy in action, he just seems pure gas.
Yeah, there is some consideration about whether you want to play the backup EX Searcher for Hien or the forward, and I think most of the time you can just immediately make that decision based on do I need more forwards or do I need more in terms of slots, do I need more backups or do I need more forwards? And I think that's going to be the primary early set method of determining which Gosetsu to play. That being said, I think that this is just a lot better than the backup one in general. The Gosetsu gets the Tenzin and the Tenzin gets the Gosetsu, and you can just repeat this as many times as you want, and then either of them can get, the standard unit, either of them can get Cyan, the 3 CP one at least, and this one can get the 7 CP Cyan too. And then this one's also a Lord, 1k Brave is no laughing matter. It's a 14, which, obviously the backup is as well, but as a forward, that matters a lot for Hien, who we're going to get to in a little bit, but he's going to let Gosetsu attack twice, and then put a lot of damage pressure on pretty quickly, and that's just something that you want to have at any point in the time against most slower decks, particularly wind decks, and that's really what Samurai is going to be beating up on with these cards, I think.
Absolutely. All right, so next we have the first in our cycle of monsters. We'll kind of mention them all here. I believe Goblin was the first one we saw, and I was actually kind of excited because I think Goblin is the best one by far. It searches out a card for 1 CP. That feels great. And then its action ability is the cheapest. You just dull Goblin and hit something for 3k. Like, that's fine. For some reason, all the other monsters are like 5 CP to do their effects, and some of the effects are okay, but they're just so expensive, and most of the other ones, too, their on-entry just isn't very inspiring. There's so many other cards that do it, in different ways. So I think Goblin is definitely the best, and you can use him for some fun little goblins, but other than him, I think all the others are... I'll be amazed if any of them see play.
Yeah, this Goblin is not... I mean, there's a lot of job Goblins, actually. This can search Princess Goblin, this can search for the other Monster Goblin, it can search for a copy of itself, which is really good. You can just chain these out immediately, kind of like Flan, but in 2022. So, I think this card is probably the best in the monster cycle. I'm not completely sure about it, but it is quite nice, and, it never hurts to have cards that do deck thinning and deal 3k. Whether or not this is, justifiable for slots is a completely different thing. But I would be surprised if we didn't at least see this in, L3, L6 fire decks, because it does seem pretty good in those.
Absolutely. Next, we have a standard unit Samurai. He's category 14, so he fits right in with Hien. Is he better than the 3 costs we got from Opus 14? It's hard to say, because that one wants to see 7 in the break zone, which was actually a bit difficult back then, but we've got so many more Samurais now, it seems to be easier. This one, you have to pay an extra 2 for him to nuke something on entry, and it's 1,000 less. It's 8 versus 9. Still, it's just more Samurais, and again, he's 14. He feeds into Hien, so yeah, it's a Samurai card. It's good.
Yeah, and I think in comparing it with the other standard unit is like, well, I think this one is considerably worse than the
Yeah.
other 3CP one, but the other 3CP Samurai standard unit is just so good. It's like obscene. That card could have been like a legend, and I don't
Yeah.
think anybody would have denied. So yeah, I think it's not really a fair comparison because that card is just so good. That being said, you're gonna play both,
Yeah.
so it's not really a big deal. I would probably play 3 of the old one, 2 of the new one, or maybe it's a 3-3. It just depends on slots. I haven't actually hammered out a build yet, so.
Do you hear that? That sounds like people want more samurai. Well, who am I to say no? Here's another samurai. This is interesting because this is a cycle of standard units. There's one in each element. They all can dull. You pay a CP, and then you pull back a standard unit forward from your break zone. But if it's 3 cost or less in the element of this card, you can play it right to this field. Well, this one's amazing because it's card named Samurai, so not only does it fit in with Cyan and Tenzin and all those, it can play, as we just mentioned, it has really good targets to slap right onto the field. A lot of these standard units, I don't know how much you'll use the other ones. I think the Lightning one is a Dragoon, so that one is also a big thumbs up. So, but this one and that, but man, just being a Samurai and can bring back other Samurais, like, it's great. There's more Samurai greatness.
Yeah, I think just like with the crystal ones, the samurai one that's in fire is just the best of the bunch because it's card named Samurai.
Yeah.
It's also, very nice that it can bring back the both of the 3CP standard unit samurais directly from the break zone. This card's just a slam dunk. I'm not sure how many samurai backups you're going to be slotting and how many utility backups you're going to be slotting, but this one is definitely a 3 of. It's not even close.
Absolutely. Next, we go from the Samurai to Scott. He's pretty worthless. The only thing I really like about him is his damage 3, because drawing 2 cards on death is pretty damn awesome. But are you going to play him beyond that? Like, I don't know. It's just maybe kind of fun in a pre-release environment, but I can't see how you'd slot this in construction when I don't think he's worth it beyond the damage 3 effect. He's a prince, though, if that matters. He's a prince.
True. He is a prince. I wouldn't be surprised if at some point this kind of effect, when it's put into the break zone direct 2 cards, is part of some kind of like random infinite loop. Like that seem like something that could happen at some point. However, there is the 3CP Viking that when it enters draw and then when it leaves draw, so that could be. It seems like that could be an even easier card to incorporate into that kind of loop. But it is possible at some point that we'll see it. I just don't think the card is very playable outside of that, and I'm not expecting that kind of infinite loop to be something that I'm looking forward to onto the horizon anytime soon. So.
Next, we have Xenos. Nice little card. Funny that he works so well with Heian because, they're enemies in the game. But, I'm amazed this says character. In the past, this would be very much, no, you play a fire, you play a fire forward or something. No, it just says play a character of cost 4. Now, it does have to be exactly 4, but still, it's not limited to fire. It can be anything else. And then all the Xenoses seem to have this kind of on attack, and so this one, when he attacks, everything else gains 2,000 power. Seems like a great fit to go in with Heian, because again, he's a 14 character, so he's going to get a double attack, which means your bodies just get bigger and bigger. As I turn it over to you, do you see him getting played outside of Heian? Because obviously we have another Xenos that kind of works with 14 as well, or do you think he's kind of locked towards that?
No, I think it's definitely possible that we see some kind of like 14 deck outside of Samurais. That being said, the Xenos itself could be good in just about anything. I've heard a lot of good things about this card, playing, random 4-cost backups, kind of like Cecil was in other decks. And it also synergizes with the new Alice and Alphanod, so I think that there's a lot of potential for this card. I'm not sure where the home is. I'm not sure if every single fire deck is just going to want to play 3 Xenos all of a sudden, but it does work with random mono fire backups. What's the 14 standard unit back? Kojin.
Oh yeah.
Like that, or it works with Dominion Legionary. These kinds of 4CP backups that tutor. It is just very synergistic with these in general. I think in the 14 decks in particular that are aiming to make use of Heian, their big competitor is the big competitor with this card is the other Xenos, right? So obviously it might be difficult to slot him in if you're playing like a Heian OTK like Fire Lightning or Fire Water or a 3-color version that's just like trying to make use of that Heian, because Xenos is going to give the Heian haste automatically, so you might be tempted to, and all of your other forwards haste for that matter. So it might not be the best fit in a category 14 deck, but there is a potential, there is a synergy, and it does work very well with Heian. So I'd be surprised if we didn't see this pop up here and there in various fire decks throughout the set.
That's fair. Next we have Tifa. I'm not really high on this card. It kind of bugs me that it costs 1 more CP than Ace would for him to come in for 2, and then you can pay the kicker to get 5. It does have a burst, though. 9k on a burst. Nothing wrong with that. And I know a lot of people are excited about the double pay. You can turn it into a forward. Obviously, that has some surprise potential of, hey, I've got 1 more forward, then you've kind of always got to think about it because it's there on my backup line. Maybe it's just not my style. I don't know if it's good or not. It's just, when I see it, I don't see wanting to pay 6 for this to then potentially pay 2 more later to go, oh, surprise, it's a forward. Do you see it any different?
Yeah, I think this is this type of, pay 2 fire to become a forward for the turn. This is a very popular effect in Magic the Gathering. In particular, they're called manlands. I think if you're playing like a hard mono fire control deck, this is like the kind of card that you might expect to like, okay, I'm gonna deal with damage 1 at a time, and that feels very like Magic the Gathering kind of winning strategy. I think in reality, it's not going to work very often. Is making your backup into a forward and paying to do so is basically letting your opponent kill your like giving your opponent an opportunity to kill your backup with damage. So I don't think that it's quite that good. I do really like these kind of strategies in Magic the Gathering, so it would be cool if I was wrong, but I just don't see it happening just because, we have the damage keyword in this game, and dealing damage 1 at a time has just proven to not be a particularly good strategy. You make a board so big that you kill your opponent in like 1 or 2 turns, or you just never attack your opponent because damage is so prevalent throughout the meta in general. So I don't think that this is a card that's going to see a lot of play because it just doesn't fit the play patterns for Final Fantasy.
Yeah. Well said, sir. There's a Berserker. It's fodder. Maybe one day we'll get a good Berserker, but today is not that day. Then we have Bahamut.
Definitely not.
Yeah, this was one I kind of went back and forth on. At first, I thought it sucked because I thought you had to divide up the damage, but it actually says choose up to 2 forwards, which means you could pick 1 forward and pile all 10 on it. But then I thought, well, there's the Opus 15 Bahamut, which is the same cost. You can reduce its cost with a crystal. It does 9. That's only 1 less. Yeah, this has got the damage 5 bump. That's not super relevant. I mean, you could split it up and do a 2 and a 2, and so it's kind of like Blaze on demand. But I don't know. The more I think about it, if you're playing fire summons, you have to have 3 of Amaterasu. That's pretty much the best thing you can pick. You probably want Brynhildr, because if I'm splitting up amongst damage anyway, don't I want a Brynhildr which will draw into burst? So then are you going to spend your next 3 on this guy? Even the crystal one isn't a guaranteed, so I don't know. The more I think about it, the more I don't like it.
Yeah, I think that this card is a little misunderstood because I think if you're not playing crystals in your deck, this is just a strict upgrade over the Final Fantasy 13 one, the crystal one that gets cheaper, the 4CP 9K.
Yeah, that's fair.
So I think in that regard, this card will see play because it's just a strict upgrade over some of those other ones. If you're not ever going to use the crystal ability, if you're not playing crystals, then yeah, you should definitely play this one. Or if your only way of getting crystals is 3 samurais, probably don't need to settle for the 4CP 9K when you could be playing this instead, because it just works so much better with Cyan, for example. So yeah, I think this card is good. I don't think it's a big deal that you can split up the damage. It is nice flexibility on the card that I think is potentially underrated. But I think more often than not, you're probably just going to be trying to deal a bunch of damage to 1 forward in particular.
Well said. You actually sold me on that a bit, so good job. Well, we need another Bahamut because you just can't have enough dragons, especially when it's the king of the dragons. This is Jet Bahamut, and I guess we'll kind of talk about all 3 of them right here now since they all work together, these winged chaos. So the ice ones one of them reduces damage, right? And then this one deals damage, and then there's another one that like increases damage. So if you have them all together, this one will deal 8k on entry, and then they all can kind of search each other out on damage 3. It seems like a cute little package. I haven't gotten to test this one. I haven't seen anyone use it, so I can't say from experience. Reading it, the only thing I wonder is how much is that damage 3 going to hurt it or help it? Because on damage 3, it's really powerful that you can just pull it out, play it right to the field, but you got to wait till damage 3. But damage 3 isn't unreasonable. I don't know. I kind of have a trouble evaluating these. How do you see them?
Yeah, it is a little odd that I guess maybe not odd, but it is a little maybe disappointing for the Violet in terms of the prospects for this card, that a lot of it is going to hinge on whether you can resolve the damage 3 or not. That being said, Amber and Garnet Bahamut, once they increase the damage by 3 or reduce the damage dealt to them by 2, they also have the ability that when they put into the break zone, you can search for one of the other ones, which is, a very nice setup into, you go to damage 3, your forward dies, you search for Jet Bahamut, you play the Jet Bahamut, and you just get the forward back. It's very clear. That being said, I'm not really sure that these kind of pass the smell test for the power level of standard as it is. I would be very happy to be wrong, because I think that these are really cool and I love category 13, but I'm a little more excited for these cards than, say, L6, L3. They kind of feel like they're a little bit lower on the power level. They take a while to get going. You don't really want them to get bounced. They're not insanely, like, the damage reduce is only 2k, so it's not like they get insanely tanky and they're just like unkillable against, when you have all 3 of them on the board. But it is nice. I'm not really convinced that the category 13 synergy means a whole lot of anything, though you can search them, with Mog 13. So yeah, I think they're just, solid.
Yep, absolutely. Well, I don't know about you, but since we haven't talked about many samurai yet, I think we should hit another one. This is Hien, our fire legend. Hien is my favorite character from Stormblood. He was my favorite new character they added to the expansion. I really loved him. Probably helped that they played Cyan's Doma music during his scenes as well, and so it was tugging on the nostalgia heartstrings. Nonetheless, this card's great. They smartly made it both fire characters and or 14 characters, so you don't have to jam him in with a bunch of 14 as long as he's just got fire, which Samurai's already is. And seeing this in practice, I haven't played it myself yet, but my friend Hood's Claw played it. He actually played against Jared, and it can just explode. It can just explode out of nowhere to just, hey, by the way, suddenly you've been hit 5 times, and if they have Cyan on board, they cleave your board down, and then now you've been board wiped. And unless you have something like Jared did sometimes, like a Bismarck, something that can react on their turn, if you don't have a way to interrupt it, it can put you down really quickly. Where you're like, oh, I thought I had life, and now I'm going to die next turn. Huh, how about that? So he's great. I thought he would be good, and in testing, he seems to be everything as advertised.
Yeah, I think that this card is the damage pressure. This is the card that is going to improve Samurai's ability to actually just dominate against the other control decks in the meta. Like I did win the game that we were talking about just there as mono win by assembling Fat Chocobo Bismarck very, very quickly. Mm-hmm. But, if I stumble one time, then he just kills me. I'm just dead. Like, that kind of damage pressure is something that's very important. I think that's going to kind of change the calculus for example, Samurais versus Sky Pirates. And, like, some of these decks that require a little more setup time, or the Windwater FFB Crystal deck, it kind of wants to play like 3 or 4 backups before it really starts churning out value. And Hien is just gonna be really good at after you take 1, 2, 3 damage from a Tenzen, just immediately closing out the game, not giving your opponent any chance to come back, I guess. And it can do it, out of nowhere. You play Sasano, you play Hien, that's 4 damage, in addition to whatever you had on board. If you took 2 damage from a Tenzen, that's 7, already. And that's the kind of thing that you have to be able to do to keep control decks in the game honest, I think. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what Samurai's new role is, really being a control killer and killing these, like, slower mid-range, Sky Parity mono indie, these kind of strategies.
His pose is so perfect for us too. He's just waiting to draw the sword, just bam, cut you up once you're done. So next we move on. Next we move on to Sabin, which is my favorite character from FF6. Him and Edgar were always my top two, the Figaro brothers. So I was very happy to see it. I love the Samano artwork. But I guess what bums me out about this card is that without Edgar, he doesn't do anything. Like, yes, you can make him cheaper, which is nice, but then he's just a black belt. And even, imagine the Shantoto from last set. If that didn't get you a character back, who cares if you can play it for one? It's just a body at that point. Yeah. Now, that being said, with Edgar, in theory, you can sit there and do an Aura Cannon for free every turn and Hadouken everything for 8k, but it just... I mean, he's technically a monk too, but fire monks have never been a thing. So if he makes them a thing, cool, I guess. But then again, he wants you to play him with other 6 characters to reduce his cost. And he's a cool card, and he clearly is cool with Edgar. But man, I just wish he did something on his own without needing Edgar on the board.
Yep. I more or less agree. I do think that, like when the Edgar Sabin stuff works, it really works. It really keeps up. The ability to deal 8k plus 2k is like all for free off of the Edgar is very important. I do think that it's good to be able to do this kind of thing at any given point in time. It's just mechanically speaking, it doesn't really keep up with the very instant pace that you need to be. It doesn't have that kind of being broken up over the stack is really, really a big hindrance to this kind of strategy. And I think that was very intentional after they saw, like how good Mashri, how good Stern is. These cards that can just do it whenever you want to do it. They kind of like wanted to, and I guess Bismarck and cards like that as well. It's like you can just do that whenever because it's an action ability. They kind of really decided to break it up with the Edgar choosing something else instead of just doing it statically, and it really shows on this card. That being said, I do think that it's really quite good just as a 1 CP 8k. That kind of has synergy with the deck anyways, so I do think it'll see play. I do think it'll be good when it works. I do think Edgar makes it quite viable. It's just lacking that last little bit of oomph that I need to really get behind it.
Yep, that's fair. So here's a Mystic Knight. This is another cycle of standard unit backups. Each one in an element, they all have this effect that you can put them in the break zone, they'll do an effect, and if you've received a point of damage this turn, it increases the effect. So the fire one goes from 4k to 8k. The thief one in wind, which I think is probably the best one, instead of milling 2 cards, mills 4 cards, which is a lot. That's 2 turns off your deck, which is pretty cool. The only other thing I'll say about these is like, so the fire one does the same damage as the ice and the lightning, and the ice one has to have a dull target and the lightning has to have an active target. And in the past, those have always been like compensated with an extra 1,000 damage, so it would be like 5 and 9. But no, they're still 4 and 8, just like the fire one. So that's funny. Other than that, if you could just dull them and break them, I could maybe see. I don't know, having to dull and pay another CP and do the effect, like maybe cool for sealed or draft, but it's hard to see this in constructed. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't think that these are, unfortunately, but it is, like you say, very cool that they kind of like double their abilities basically when you deal the damage, but like they're not worth building around for the damage ability, so they're mostly pack fodder, mostly L3 buffer for these kinds of abilities that you need to be able, you need to have a certain amount of backups in order for L3 to be playable. So they just gave some medium size, backups for the deck and called it a day. And I think that's totally fine, but it's nothing to be, excited about the entire cycle.
Yep. Speaking of pack fodder with some good art, we have Merilith. This is another cycle of these chaos cards. I think this is our 3rd cycle of them, and man, like, it's close. It's so close to being, that might be worth a look, which is that if it came back onto the field active, I would absolutely, at minimum, slot a 1 in. You can pitch it early, and then when you get to that damage 5, boom, pay a single CP. I've got this big blocker with first strike. But they all come onto the field dull. And like some of the other ones actually also do something. Merilith doesn't do it. That's all she does is a big body. Like,
She has first strike instead.
Yeah, I can't believe she doesn't come onto the field active. So, I mean, I'm not really huge on any of these, but this one especially is like, oh, if it was active, I might actually play it. But since it's not active, it's staying in the binder. What do you think?
Yeah, I think staying in the binder is basically what the only thing that we could possibly expect from this cycle. That being said, I do think that they're like really cool, and I want to play them in title, and they all look really good. And I think that there is like a very small chance that the win one Tiamat could see play as like a random one of. But no, this ain't it for these kinds of effects. I do at some point in my career really want to resolve like all 5 of these on the damage 5.
Right.
Yeah.
That would be amazing. So next we have Mont Blanc, which goes in with my spoiler, which was Hurdy. We'll get to him later in Ice. I've gotten to test this card. He's kind of weird in testing, so it feels really bad when you already pulled the Hurdy and then you get Mont Blanc, because he doesn't just search it, he specifically searches Hurdy. So if you already have Hurdy, it's like, oh, so I guess I could pay 3 CP to do nothing because you can't play the second copy on the field. Like, so that unfortunately hurts it. That said, I don't know. I almost wonder, I wonder why they locked it into Fire Ice, or at least Fire. Like, why do you have to pay Ice CP for that? That almost seems a little too much. It's already 3 on entry, which is awkward to play turn 1. You know, really you want to play this off of 1 backup already down, play 3 on curve, pitch 2, you know, get the Hurdy out. Like, however, when it lines up, when you get to do that, it feels great. You're pulling a card directly from the deck, so that's 1 card less. You don't have to pitch from your hand. So when it works, it's great. When it doesn't work, I don't know how I feel about it.
Yeah, I think that they're very wary with this type of effect, because there was a whole cycle of these in chapters, and they were just like far and away the most busted backups in the entire game. Basically, every deck played at least 3 of them. Like they had ones for mono, they had ones that worked in certain element combinations, and those mono decks and those element combinations were like the only decks that saw play. Basically, if you didn't have these kinds of backups, you were just at a loss. At the time, those backups were 2 CP with the exact same effect. So Mont Blanc is 3 CP, which makes it considerably worse. And then Mont Blanc also has the you can only play Ice for the effect restriction. So it is like double restricted compared to these. That being said, I still think that the Mont Blanc is probably really, really good. These kinds of effects are quite strong. You know, being a 1 CP is essentially a 1 CP backup that guarantees you have, you know, 2 ice, an ice backup and 2 Moogles on the board, which could be potentially relevant at some point. And you know, the Hardy that it's fetching from that we'll get to later, it is quite a solid card. So these aren't, you know, like the godsend backups that we were hoping for from chapters, but I still think that Mont Blanc is quite a good card, and I think it'll go in probably most Fire Ice decks, with the exception of maybe Verstale, which doesn't really want to play this kind of effect so much. So,
Kupo! All right, moving on to Red 13, our final fire card, I believe. This one I've gone really back and forth on. I like his versatility. I like that if you see him turn 1, no big deal. Put him down, 2 cost backup, move on with my day. I like that, there's a big threat I need to take out. There's 2 5Ks, or there's 2 7Ks, and you go, cool, and then kill it. But then maybe there's just a big 10K or 9K that you use double on, but I don't know, then you're spending 6 on it. I do like his versatility. Is he better than Zondi? I don't know, because Zondi deals you a point of damage, which could be a good thing. Hit yourself for a burst or something, and then, I don't know, his text doesn't read bad. He's one of these weird cards where, his text reads good, and yet for some reason I'm just not sold on him. What do you think, Jared?
Yeah, I think that this is a solid one of in basically most fire decks. I'm not sure if you're going to be able to slot him that much, but it is very versatile. Obviously, the discard effect works very well with waltzes. So if you're playing fire lightning waltzes, I think it has some bonus synergies and text there. That being said, I was pleasantly surprised when Rob got this as his spoiler, because I think we're probably going to see one of it splashed in random decks for the most part. Additionally, I think in L3, L6, this card is just a slam dunk as a great removal option. I think we'll probably play 2 or 3 of them in most of those decks, depending on what the backup situation looks like. And as a little bit of bonus energy, it's probably the cutest card in the set.
Yeah.
So I think it's got that going for it.
It's fair. You can't complain about that. All right, that is fire. We're all heated up, so let's cool down with some ice. Here we have Umaro. When we first saw the translation for this, I had either misread it or I don't know. I thought it made your opponent discard a card when it entered. Turns out it actually makes you discard if you don't have if you're not meeting the requirement. I really liked this when I read it, and I've tested, I've played with it, and it can be kind of tough to get 5-6 characters. If it was 4, that would be, because what will often happen, I'll have 3 backups. I've got Gestelian Empire Sid, I've got Interceptor, and then throw another one out there. And then if you play Umaro, you still have to discard your own card. So now you're paying 4 for this guy.
Yep.
He has to attack, but at least he's a big 9k body, so I don't think that's a huge issue. And then his action ability is great. And Alex Hancock's mentioned this too, is that if there's ever a time like, oh, I don't want to attack because it's going to get himself killed, you can always just crack him to do the discard. That being said, I really wasn't a fan of having to discard myself if he came down at the wrong time, so I was a little less high on him after I saw him. And where I wanted to put him fire ice, you can't take it. Like if you had a way to give him brave, you could attack and then on their turn force them to discard too, which I think would be really strong, but then you're going into earth. So I don't know, in testing he wasn't quite as good as I'd hoped he was. What do you think?
Yeah, I think very simply we can just evaluate it as, well, when he enters, you're probably going to discard. So he's a 4 CP 9k, if you look at it like that. Additionally, you could also just empty your hand, which is another option that is probably quite there. And in that regard, I think Umaro is probably quite good. That being said, I think you're definitely right. The real selling point for this card for me is that you can just crack him if he's going to die. Yeah. And when he attacks, and that's what I really like about the card. It is interesting that they made this card. They didn't give it the restriction that you can't do it on your opponent's turn, but then they made him attack. So it's got that pseudo restriction. That being said, you could potentially Kadaj is probably the best way to give Brave in the game right now, and so Kadaj could potentially allow you to really close out the game against your opponent if they have no hand and then they draw 2 cards and then you make them discard their 2 cards or whatever. So yeah, I do think that the card does have some cute synergies. It is very techy, I guess is the right word for it. That being said, I'm not sure if the 6 deck in particular is really the best deck to take advantage of this. I think it kind of belongs more in the kind of turbo discard kind of play style. And you just kind of ignore the downside because it's going to be, you're playing out your entire hand, and that's about what you can do.
I always love when you can find those uses for him. Great Kadaj mentioned too. Here we have Scholar. Did we not have one of these in Fire? I guess it was the Samurai. It was technically the Samurai. Some of these have art from the games, and some of them have their own full art. So it kind of throws me off that they're all technically a cycle of units. But so we have these standard units. This one you can enter, you pay an ice, make them discard a card. This is one of those cards that I'm like, why is this on par with Sarah from Opus 1 still? So I'm paying 3 ultimately to get a discard, except Sarah's 1 more. Now granted, this is multi-playable, so you could slam out a whole bunch, but I don't know. And then the damage 3 effect, just say even if it was just dull itself to dull a forward, maybe that would be okay, but you got to pay an ice and dull itself to dull a single forward. I don't know. I mean, the art's cool. I really love the art and the pose, but I'm not sold on why I should play this over Sarah, because Sarah doesn't die to Brynhildr, and this does.
Yeah, I think that the idea behind this, I think one thing about it is that they wanted to give you some flexibility in cost. So it's a 2-drop that you can just play as a 2-drop, or you can play it as a 3-drop with the discard ability, which it could potentially be relevant for cards that play cards from the break zone or from your hand, like the Crystal Exarch. Obviously, you can't put Sarah into play if you have 2 backups, but you can put it into play. You can put this into play if you have 2 backups, and then just pay the extra cost. So there is some potential upside to the 2+1 instead of the 3. That being said, I think that the real reason that we see this card at this stat line with this effect is because they just didn't want to repeat the same mistake that Thaumaturge was. They said, okay, we want to give people an option to have two CP cards that discard, but Thaumaturge was pretty good, and it's kind of promoted these toxic gameplay settings, and so we kind of want to step away from that. And I think that Scholar is a pretty good design choice there. In terms of card viability, I'm not totally sold on this card. However, we did see the Umaro, so I wouldn't be surprised if we saw some kind of turbo discard deck attempt to make waves, whether that's the quality of these cards is high enough to compete with what Standard looks like now, that's another question, I think.
Fair. Super Soldier, he's pack fodder, move past him.
That's garbage.
Here we have Edward. This one's very interesting. So you can just leave this up at all times, and then on your opponent's turn, just completely interrupt if they go for Madame Edel, whatever they try to bring back. You snipe it, remove it from the game. Lena tries to get the Sophie, you just remove the Sophie from the game. However, unlike something like Miss Dragon, which is kind of hidden, or even White Mage, which if everything's tapped out, they know you at least have to spend a card in hand. This one does advertise itself a lot. And Mike, I don't know what to think about this card because, again, in those situations, that's insanely powerful. I just dole a backup and I completely cancel your combo, your Ursula, your Lena, your whatever. Fantastic. However, it also means that's one less CP you're spending every turn, and Ice isn't really known for regenerating its value anyway, so are you going to be able to afford to constantly leave this up? I don't know. I'm excited to see this card. I'm excited. I hope someone can make it work really well because I think it's really cool. I just don't know if it's going to be worth those downsides to it or not. What do you think?
Yeah, I really like the card in general, and I really like the design choice of putting it in Ice. I think you're definitely right that Ice is one of those decks that is really kind of trying to eke out every little bit of CP that it can. However, Ice has kind of moved into this, well, I shouldn't say Ice in general, but like aside from like Ice Earth, you know, like control strategies and stuff like that, it's kind of moved into this situation where you're kind of playing off the top of your deck because both players are low on resources. And I think flexible backups are good in that type of situation, and Edward is a pretty good use of that floating CP that sometimes will just be lost in Ice anyways. It also works really well in those, you know, control shells. So I think because it's just a nice flexible backup that you can kind of play draw pass games and kind of lock out your opponent with your backups. Like, you know, Unalesca plus Scale Toad can kind of lock your opponent out of the game if they don't have an economy and they don't have cards that can just be slammed into the table. So I do really like this card. I think it works very well in both types of Ice. I think it works a little bit better in the slower kinds of Ice. However, I do have high expectations of this card. It is, I think the saddest thing about this is that they didn't make it a job Prince or job King, so you could search it with Claris or Sarah. Because if it was a searchable backup, I think it would be much, much, much better. As it stands, I still think it's a great card, but it's like for me, it's like a 4 out of 5 instead of a 5 out of 5 because of that.
That's fair. Next, we have Curry Wazette. I believe this is Glaciela's father. I mean, he's your crystal stuff. Like, his action ability is undeniably incredible. It's what I've been wanting on an Ice Legend for the longest time, something that just enters the field and does that. And if that would be too strong, then at least have it dull freeze all the forwards. Let that be like Ice's form of a board wipe. Incredible ability, but just very expensive and very slow. He has to live a whole turn to see it, and then it uses a lot of crystals. Huge payoff for it. I'll be surprised if anyone plays this, though, because it just seems like too much work for it.
Yep, I totally agree. I think this card is like, you know, having a nice card that just gives you a crystal when it enters, great. But it's kind of all downhill text from there. We saw with Setzer that, like, you know, having these cards that give you crystals when units die is not like awful. But, you know, Regulus and Setzer, they were kind of on the lower end of these crystal generating cards. It's much better to just have those guaranteed crystals immediately than it is to have crystals over time, maybe. And so because of that, I'm not really sold on the Curry Wazette. Additionally, I think that you're right, the action ability is very powerful. It's something that I definitely want to see in Ice, but 3 crystals and a Dole on a 5 CP AK is just like, that ain't it, fam. It's like a 5 CP that you can slow generator that can be Amaterasu because it has the field ability. So I don't really see this card being played almost at all, but even if it does, then maybe it's, you know, like an L3 or bust kind of situation.
That's not it, folks. What about this new Shiva? Is she it? Well, let's find out. So if you can break a 2 cost, it's a great effect. Not only do they lose this body, they have to discard a card as well. Very potent against something like Rydia or the Twins. You know, 2 costs have only gotten stronger and stronger and more prominent as the game has gone on. But it's ice, so it has to be dull as well. And then the second effect, the only thing I can really think of is like Sasano is the big thing it counters. You know, maybe Philia 2 if anyone's still running that. I guess maybe New Prish it could kind of work against. But really, to me, I think of it as like the Sasano counter, which is an incredible counter to say, hey, for 2CP, your Sasano doesn't work. Awesome, you sacrificed a backup. But outside of that, it's, I don't know, like, I want to like this one, but I also know just how difficult it's been for Ice's summons, and they keep printing these ice summons with just these, it's got to be this exact condition, and we'll give it to you if it's this condition, but I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised to see this go in the long line of ice summons and other Shivas that just, they sound so cool, and they're just not.
Yeah, I think it's another, so the removal half of this card is another example of Ice getting really, really good removal that has 2 conditions on it instead of 1. That kind of like makes it difficult to play. However, you know, the other half of the card kind of redeems it a little bit for me. I'm not like, I saw a lot of like gut reactions when this card came out that this card was either total garbage or that it was like super busted. I think the truth is probably somewhere more in between. But you know, Ice having a nice, you know, Sasano counter, I do think that is very, very nice for the deck, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see this card pop up from time to time. I'd be surprised if it was like a 3 of in like every deck. I don't think that's gonna happen. So
that's fair. All right, next we have the Ice Monster. I'll just go ahead and go past him. We talked about that.
Yeah, that's the worst one.
Yeah, he's terrible. Here we have Zegzat. This is going to be interesting. I'm curious to know what you think of this card. So when I first saw this card, I hated it. I thought, this card blows. This isn't anything I want to do, and I'm thinking about paying for it fairly because I play a lot of Ice Discard, and I have since Opus 15, 14. And what I don't like about him is that he has anti-synergy with everything else in that deck. Shantoto, Physalis, Siddlestein, Proto-Falsi Atom, the YTK monster. All these cards, I want my opponent to have a low hand. So I'm like, well, then why would I want this guy who only works when they have a big card in hand? So that I didn't like him for. However, someone pointed out that if you cheat him in, that's damn good. If you were to play Bart's Boko, not that anyone plays Bart's Boko, but or even 2CP or 4CP Phoenix, which can call back a 2 cost or less, this guy's incredible if you can cheat him in. And then if they do have a high hand, you get the Zidane effect. It's not really the Zidane effect because you can't grab a backup, but it's similar. You look at their hand, you can pull out an Amaterasu, pull out a big threat. His on attack just seems kind of like, it felt like they had to stick a last line of text on. That one doesn't seem huge, so I don't like paying for this guy fairly. Something else someone pointed out too is if you were trying to pay for him fairly, the cheapest he can be to get his effect is a cost 4. If they have exactly 3 cards in hand, you bring him down. But he's also then very vulnerable to stack stuff, so they could go, cool, on the stack, cast this thing, my hand is lower now, so now you don't get an effect. I don't know. I just, again, cheating him in, I think I love him. I can't see where I would use this guy playing him fairly. Jared, educate me.
Yeah, so I think the original design for this card. Let's completely put aside cheating him in for a second and say that the original design behind this card is that it's supposed to be good whether your opponent has 3 cards in their hand or 0 cards in their hand, right? And you can kind of play it along the curve at any point. So if it's a 1CP 9K with its effect because your opponent is handless, that's just pretty good stats and value. And you know the 1K pump is a lot better than it reads on paper. I don't know if you've had a chance to see other people play this card, but yeah, the 1K pump in Ice is very, very solid. You know, having if you played, for God's sake, like a Dukelarg, then this being a 1CP 10K is just very good. But even as a 1CP 9K, just great. As a 2CP 9K, when your opponent has 1 card in hand, also just great. And then as a 4CP 9K, it's going to kind of reduce itself by 2CP by taking a card from your opponent's hand is really what it says. So it's supposed to be as a 1, 2, or 4. It's just a very solid card, nice, efficient threat. Then it can also come in when your opponent is, or when you're trying to cheat it in with, you know, the Crystal Exarch, with Lena is another big one, with Bart's Boko. Like I said, I think it's absolutely insane with Bart's Boko. Is that enough to, like, you know, redeem the Bart's Boko deck? I don't think so, probably, but it is very, very good. I think it would probably immediately slam 2 of these in. for that deck. And but yeah, the big one I think is mostly Lena and the Crystal Exarch. I haven't played any Crystal Exarch decks. I'm not really like sold on ice as an element in general in terms of like the standing of the meta. But I think if there was like an ice deck that was playing Crystal Exarch and these kinds of things, Zezat would be like a big standout for one of the best cards in the deck. But most of the times I've seen him play it, it's off of Lena, and it's just great in that. But I've also seen him cast as a 4CP9K with that effect, and it's been great. Like we all know how good Thoughtseize Zidane is. It's basically the same card.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really, really like it.
Awesome. I hope it proves to be great because I love to see a good Ice Legend. All right, next we have Setzer. Again, character I absolutely adore from 6. Some fun mono art. Man, I feel like they just can't. I don't know. I sometimes I still feel like the Opus 4 Setzer is still just my favorite one. Although the Opus 8 backup is really nice too. And again, it's a shame he kind of name clashes if you're going for the 6 deck. That being said, I kind of dismissed his on-entry discard effect at first, but other people point out you can play some fun mind games with this. If you drop this early and you declare backup, you're giving them a choice. Well, they don't want to throw out their backup because they want to play it. So now, do they give you the card draw? What do they do? So that's kind of interesting. His special still feels a little underwhelming to me, even if you were to use Setzer so that you just pay an ice for it. You have to choose the forward first, then you have this random element. You remove a card from the game, so you just lose a card. What if you lose something important? And then, what if it's not even enough to kill the thing you chose? Like, I don't know, that one's just a little too high-rolly for me. I'd rather do the high-rolliness of slots, the Opus 11 Setzer, because it's just two kind of bonkers effects. Yeah. Man, if he had a different name, too, maybe I'd like him a bit more, but just the fact that he's Setzer, I can't see wanting to use this over one of the other two.
Yeah, I think that the enter the field ability is much, much better than any of the other forward Setzers we've had up until this point. I really, really like this name a card type, your opponent discards one, and then sometimes you draw one. Like if your opponent discarded one and you drew one off of this ability, then it's just a 0 CP AK, right? Like that's really, really good value, and I think this card is quite good in that regard. That being said, it's not always, quite that simple. So I don't necessarily think that it's just like a shoe-in, particularly because the backup Setzer is just so good in those 6 decks. The EX Burst, retrieve a 6 character from your break zone, is also that card is also just going to be quite good at reducing your Sabin, reducing or enabling lock and stuff like that. And so I'm not really sure that this Setzer is going to be played in standard when that backup Setzer is available. However, I think in L3, L6, where that Setzer is unavailable, this card is going to be quite good. I expect to see a lot of it with the Edgar and Sabin in those contexts.
Yeah, it seems like it's great there. Man,
yeah,
moving...
and I think, the S ability is just flavor text for the most part. Yeah. It's probably nice to be able to resolve it sometimes, but it's not going to happen most of the time, and you're not going to rely on it as a key part of the plan, but yeah.
That's fair. All right, now we're on to Potential the card. This is Sarah, Ice Legend. I want this to succeed so badly, and I want to like it, but I also can't deny the amount of hoops it seems like you have to jump through. So the on-attack trigger, if you can get it to go, is undeniably insane. Dull freeze any character on the board, and they discard a card. That's so much resources you're denying them every turn. However, the first effect is going to feel terrible if you whiff on it, and even things like Shadow are still very easy to whiff on, and it's kind of got this weird synergy too of you kind of want to play it early, right, so that you can hit a Moogle back up and immediately play it to the field, but it also wants you to have a bunch of backups so that you can get its on attack trigger. So I hope it's, I don't know, I want to see it succeed, but I have a feeling it's just going to be too much work. What do you think?
Yeah, I kind of mostly agree with that. There is some potential here, particularly I think Fire Ice is really where you can kind of really jam up the number of Moogles that you play, because we have the Montblanc and Hardy, and then we have the old Fire and Ice Moogles, which are all quite solid. That being said, Moogles have never really been the sauce in Final Fantasy, and I think that trend is probably going to continue. However, it is a nice, cool card. I think, in L6, L3 again, these kinds of synergies are things that we should be looking out for, where the power level is a little bit lower. But I don't think this is going to be making, huge waves. Obviously, it can be Amaterasu, and that's kind of too big of a liability some of the time, I think. And Reveal 5 in general is, the cursed mechanic.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, this next card, Terra, I thought it was bad when I first read it, and then Arciella got revealed, and I was like, oh, well, Arciella lets you pick your opponent's summons. This one doesn't, so now it's even worse. And it's just like, if there was a way to get more counters, maybe it'd be one thing, but you get a one-time fight. I don't know. Poor Terra.
Yeah. This card is pack filler. I think they felt obligated to put a Terra in after deciding that they were going to make 6 a big part of the set, and... Yeah. They were like, well, but we just made that Legend Terra, so let's just call it a day.
Yeah,
it's fine. Don't worry about it. I threw in the towel on that one, I think.
Yeah, Time Mage is the Ice Standard unit backup. We'll move past that one. Hurdy is my spoiler, so I'm 100% biased. So Jared will have to give me the correct power level. Yeah. However, what I loved about it originally is the simple, just dull and break. You can dull freeze a forward, and in particular, that both of his effects can be used on your opponent's turn, which I think is when you would want to do it. Oh, you're going to combat? All right, dull freeze. I'm going to knock that out for 2 combat phases. And then he has what people refer to as a flash effect, in that he can just bring in a 5 cost of less as long as it's fire ice on your opponent's turn. People have really been speculating about the old Opus 9 Vayne. Main phase 2, they go to end, be like, before you end, surprise, here's Vayne. I'm going to tax all your stuff. I absolutely adore this card, but again, it was mine, so I'm totally biased. Jared, what's Hurdy like?
Well, it comes in off the Mont Blanc, so it really can't be that poor, I think. But I do quite like the card. I do like that it works. Like the Mont Blanc sets it up very well. You just need one other ice backup, and you can have the flash effect ready. It is nice that he has 2 effects that puts him in the break zone. When you run Mont Blanc, that can be very important because, I want to play another Hurdy from my deck. So it can feel quite bad if you draw the Hurdy first and the Mont Blanc, but at least there's some kind of remedy for potentially getting value off of the first Hurdy and then getting another one into play with the Mont Blanc as well. In terms of cards that I really want to play off of this effect, Sarah's probably not up there, but I think that's kind of what they intended for you to do with the card, which is kind of strange. However, I do think, cards like the 5 CP Sephiroth from Opus 1, those are generally very, very strong effects to resolve on your opponent's turn. I don't really expect that we're going to be putting in, Versatile or Lastwell and these kinds of cards. Kind of expect more cards that get particularly egregious when you have Flash with them to be used with it.
Yeah, absolutely fair. There's the Bahamets. We'd mentioned them earlier with the red one, so we'll move up to Harley, which is just a bafflingly bad backup. I don't understand, unless you're trying to mill your opponent, but we already have an infinite loop mill way to do that, so why would you want them to draw cards? I don't get this one at all.
Yeah, this card's pretty poor. I'm not really sure what they wanted us to do with that one. At first, I thought it was searchable, and then I realized that it's not. So there's really no saving it after that, I believe.
Throw it to the dumpster. Here we have White Tiger Lassie Kunmi. A lot of people have shit on this card. I will say, having played a lot of Ace Discard, so here's my perfect scenario. Your opponent has no cards in hand. You've got this on the field. So she's got 2k power and Brave, right? So they have nothing in hand. So now, if they play anything, they can never attack you because you have this card that just won't die and can block anything because it can't be broken. So they have to draw 2 cards for turn, and if they want to attempt to attack, they have to have 1 cards that aren't dull frozen to do it, and they can't play anything from hand because this card will block them infinitely. Now that's very specific. Will that ever work out? Maybe not. So maybe this card is as bad as everyone else seems to think it is, but I am going to at least try it for that scenario of haha, you're kind of locked. I have this unbreakable card that you can't do anything about. Jared, do you share any of that enthusiasm, or are you no, it's kind of bad?
Yeah, I think this kind of wraps around to what we were talking about with Ice Earth and locking your opponent out of the game with Skeletoad and Unalesca every turn, getting 1 to 2 discards plus whatever value you're generating and forcing them to discard their own hand to play their cards. Kunmi seems like a very simple 1 card lock right there, right? You could just keep this on. You only have to play 1 in your deck, and then if you just play ways to recur it from the break zone, particularly in Ice Earth, you can just kind of like one card your opponent with this because it's a Brave Unbreakable 9K. And yeah, I really do quite like the design behind this card. I don't think it is like quite nearly as bad as most people said at the card's reveal in Kurosawa's video. I think that the card definitely has its uses. I don't think it is like egregiously powerful, but I would be surprised if we didn't see some, particularly slower Ice Earth decks trying to make use of this card.
Fair enough. Fencer will go past. That's a standard unit ice backup. Mog 13-2. Name clashes with a great searcher in the game, and it's one of these high rolly cards that I'm just not a fan of. And unfortunately, unlike something like Lonnie, which you can save for later as Zidane, you have to use it that turn. So you're putting all your eggs into that basket and hoping you pull something amazing that you can immediately cast. So too high rolly for me.
Yeah, I 100% agree.
And continuing the trend of cards that aren't better than, like, okay, it's been since Opus 3 since we had Sid Alstein. This is Yotsuyu, which is a character I really like from Stormblood. And the fact that this isn't just better Sid Alstein really bugs me. Like, I'm amazed this card wasn't the flip of Remora, in that you choose a card, or you choose a forward, your opponent discards, and then if they have no cards, you break it. Like Remora, you choose a forward, you draw a card, then that loses power based on that. So the only way you can ever guarantee the break is if they have no hand, in which case, why wouldn't you play Sid Alstein? Because he's a 9K. This is 6,000 power for some reason. Why? It dies to even 7K damage stuff. It dies to Amaterasu. And any card, and there'll be other cards in the set we'll talk about that do this, if you ever give your opponent a choice, they're always going to choose the least damaging option for them. If they don't care about that forward, they'll go, okay, yeah, you can break it. Or if they go, oh yeah, I'll save it here, I'll just throw a card out. I guess I'm just baffled that 14 sets later we don't have such a great strict improvement on Sid Alstein. I was so disappointed when I saw this.
Yeah, I think this kind of wraps back around to they don't really want to make turbo discard style strats be that great because they feel really bad to play against, and so cards like this.
Yep. Finally, speaking more discard is Legendary Turk. I actually have played a Turks deck, so I've gotten to play with this guy. The fact that he is job member of the Turks is what makes him worth playing in the Turks. However, I never wanted to use his effect. Like, discarding 2 cards is huge. And again, especially in Ice Lightning, these cards don't really have ways to recur value. This isn't Water or Wind where they can draw a bunch of stuff. So I just never wanted to use the effect. And it's just so weird that if you want his break, which is probably his best, that you have to do it on himself. And now again, 5K out of nowhere, sure, can mess with a lot of combat, but I don't know, some Turks decks too play so, I probably play slower than most Turks players. Most of them I know just slam out Alcid and as many things as they can at once. So are they going to have the cards to do this? I don't know. I wasn't a big fan of him other than his job name.
Yeah, I'm not really sold on Turks as in general as a strategy, though they did get this and another card that we'll get to later in Lightning. I think the only good text on this card is job member of the Turks, and the rest of it is mostly garbage. I'm not really sold on Ice Lightning as the best suite for Turks either. I think it probably works better as a Mono Lightning or a Lightning Earth deck in potentially. But yeah, I mean, there's not a whole lot else to say about this card. If you're going to play Ice Lightning Turks, you're going to play this card because it has a job. If not, you're never going to play this card.
All right, we've cooled off with ice. Let's go to wind. Here's the Dancer standard unit. I can't believe I'm saying this about wind, but it's amazing that this doesn't pay for itself, that it actually doesn't activate enough backups to supplement the cost if you pay the trigger. That's just incredible in this day and age in wind. Other than that, even its effect, I feel like you would rather use it for Lillicet abilities, so I don't know, just seems kind of average to me.
Well, I think that just the fact that this is a card named Dancer that comes out so cheaply is really good. And also, you can dole your dancers to do Lillicet ability, and then play this dancer, and then reactivate the dancers. So there is some kind of there is a lot of flexibility in the card, and I think the fact that it can activate characters and which means backups and forwards, so it's going to get your dancers up again, is particularly relevant, and it also enables Pinello's ability, so I think there's some stuff there. For dancers only, this card is very good. I think we're probably going to see 3 of it in basically all Dancer decks that play Wind at least, which should be all of them, but maybe not. You never know. Outside of that, I don't think it's going to see play. It doesn't really make anything new happen with Loop. So yeah, it's just a Dancer only card. In Dancers, it is really good, and also it looks great as a full art.
Yeah, absolutely. This next card, I will be amazed if it's not good at a bare minimum. This is Onion Knight. He's a Job Ninja. He's technically Job Warrior Light too, although I don't know what Warrior Light builds you'd fit him in, but just everything's about him cool. So on entry, you prevent something from blocking, which is exactly what ninjas want. So they're like, cool, now we're just going to scurry in, shuriken you in the nighttime. And then his action ability is just great that you can do it on your opponent's hand too. You can block an attack with him and then bounce him out, flash in something else, flash in the new Yugiri, flash in Gecko, and then blow everybody up with the ninjas. It's not color restricted. It's just the cost 3 or 4. Like, I can't see how this could possibly be bad. This seems like such a good card for ninjas.
Yeah, so I think that this card is like one of my most anticipated cards of the set. I'm not gonna say it's like the best card in the set because we obviously just haven't played it, and last time I did that it was Agrius, and Agrius ended up being not a flop, but it was not well suited to the Mashri meta.
Mm-hmm.
But this card has 2 great jobs. Ninja, Warrior of Light, both great jobs. I think it's great for Warrior Light deck. I think it's great for the Ninja deck. So get that out of the way. Also, the enter the field ability is just fine. I don't really think that the cannot attack or block is going to be a huge deal for most of those decks. Although it can be nice, particularly if you're potentially hasting Onion Knight and playing him multiple times in the same turn.
Yeah.
But the real gem of this card is that action ability. Dull, return him to the hand, play a 4 to cost 3 or 4 from your hand to the field. The flexibility on that is just so insane, and it basically says, well, every 3 or 4 drop in the deck if you're playing Wind, or every 3 or 4 drop in the game if you're playing Wind, can have Flash, which is just something that we've never had up until this point. And I think it's a really, really big deal for a lot of decks. I think it's going to go very well in the Mono Wind Fat Chocobo deck, because obviously you're not going to play this instead of Fat Chocobo on turn 1, but you can just plop this down with an edge on the field. Your opponent can't clear it because you have edge out, and then the Onion Knight is just going to continue getting you more and more CP value by putting in Sin at instant speed, or the new Typhon at instant speed, or whatever it is. It can be, you can Zidane Thoughtseize your opponent on their turn.
Gross.
Or Yishtul. Yeah, I think that this card is just nuts, and it works really, really well in Ice Wind as well. You can put Brawleye on the field at instant if that's ever going to be relevant. There's just so many options with this card. I have no idea where the best place to put him is going to be, but I cannot imagine that we're going to play the game and Wind will be viable, and this card is not part of that sort of deck. It looks so good.
Preach, brother, preach. Speaking of good stuff, I've gotten to see this one in action. This is Gargus. He's technically a black mage, though I can't see that being relevant unless they get wind support all of a sudden, but who cares? He doesn't need that because his poison counters, which is kind of something I'd even asked for in some videos, even just going to attack phase and turning a 9k body into a 7k that's now just permanently weakened while he's on the field, that alone is good, but then you get Glaciella out with this guy, and I'll discard a crystal, minus 6,000 to 2 forwards, and then the counters don't go away. So even if you kill him, if he's susceptible to like Brynhilde or something, the next time they play the next one, boom, your stuff just instantly shrinks. Yep. Like, he's been a bit of a terror watching him, and I know my buddy Hood just absolutely adores this guy.
Yeah, I played some of the few games that I've played of the current set. I played with this card in Glaciella and Windwater FFB, and it was great. I thought I did a really good job. It's very good at cleaning up forwards. Like, it requires Glaciella to be on the field, so it's never going to be, the best card in the deck. That's just not going to happen. But it's been quite solid, and I have enjoyed it quite a lot. So I would expect to see, if there is Windwater FFB as one of the top decks, this is just definitely going to be part of it.
Yep, absolutely. There we have the Ranger. That's backup fodder. We've touched on those. Here we have Kelgar, which has got to be like just the most boring legend to me, which is interesting because his effect doesn't read bad. And as a matter of fact, I like that he kind of feeds into himself, that he doesn't want there to be a 5 cost. And so when he enters, he says, oh, there is a 5 cost? Okay, let me just get rid of that. If they have multiple 5 costs or more, though, then he isn't going to do anything, which makes him very weird to play. And then, even then, like, again, haste, first strike, brave, nothing shabby about that. And yet, I don't know, it's not exciting. And with a lot of 9Ks and power buffs running around too, even with first strike, then go, okay, step this 9K in front of him. He's dead now. What are you going to do about it? Like, I don't know. He just reads super boring to me, and maybe he's amazing, but he just doesn't excite me.
Yeah, I think that the big reason that we saw this as like a 4 CP 8K with the enter the field ability versus a 5 CP 9K with the same exact ability is because they wanted you to be able to Amaterasu it, for one, and for two, so that we could play it off of Onion Knight, which is basically the only thing that I actually really, really like about the Kelger. I'm not really sold on this Haste, First Strike, Brave, 4 CP 8K stat line. It's obviously not bad, but, you know, like, I really wanted it to be a 9K, because if as an 8K, my opponent could have, you know, Luca, or they could be playing Soiree and they could just have a 4 CP 8K and then they could buff it 1K with Lexa. Like, it doesn't really cover the bases that I wanted it to. So I'd be surprised if this card didn't see play, because it just has enough text on it that and very like a solid, very like good card kind of thing that we should probably see it at some point, but I'd be surprised if it was more than like 1 or 2, and I'd be surprised if it was really like an important part of the deck that it's in. It's just a random techie good card that potentially works in like Fat Chocobo because you can't play summons in that deck, or, you know, stuff like that.
Yep, good point. I like the point with the Onion Knight too. There's the Thief. Like I said, that's that standard unit line. I thought that was one of the better ones. Sid Polendina, which is our generic category searcher. Finally get one for 4. I mean, that's such a straightforward effect that we all know about. I don't have much to say about it. I'll really just ask, what do you think about it being in Wind as its element? 4 is such a well-supported category. 4 is like 7. There's just stuff all over the place. So are you happy it's in Wind?
Oh yeah, I think that this is like low-key one of the most important cards of the set, because, well, now I can search Cecil and Edge and Theodore and Hooded Man. You know, like this just opened up, finally, like, so many possibilities in, obviously, in multicolor deck building. You know, having an extra search for Rydia in Earth Wind is a big deal, but just even in, you know, Mono Wind, having an extra 4 backup in the element that you can actually play makes Theodore so much more playable. I think it's very good for the Fat Chocobo deck. You know, it says add Edge, Cecil, Hooded Man, Theodore. Those are all very important. In particular, assembling Cecil Edge is the best thing that you can do in some matches for the deck, and I think playing one of the Sid Polendina goes a long way in helping you get that sooner rather than later. So yeah, I'm very excited for this card. I think it's going to see like immediate play. I think it might actually make the Category 4 Wind Lightning deck playable as well. So I have a high expectation for this card, and I expect to see a lot of it going forward.
Yo, dog, I heard you like Cecil. So what if I give you a Cecil that you wouldn't even want to use in title?
Yeah, I think this one's pack fodder. However, you know, a lot of people are giving this card like way too much shit, I think. Like, even as pack fodder draft card, it's a 4 CP 9K basically. That you could do a lot worse than a 4 CP 9K in draft. So yeah, I think that this card is, obviously, I'm not like super excited about it, but they didn't want us to use this Cecil anyways, and if they weren't going to have us use this Cecil, then this is probably like the best we could have asked for, right? So I'm quite fine with it.
Jared, I appreciate that defense of it. Here's 7 again, another type. Like, why is this worse than the old 7? The old 7 had a special which could cancel autos or other specials, and then she had this great field effect too, where she just said, "Hey, none of your big guys can block us." And this one doesn't do anything on entry, has to live a whole turn, then she has to dull herself. And granted, it's auto ability cancel, and that's always a good thing. But then your opponent could just pay a tax for it. So they like,
Yeah, I think this one's pretty poor. I think this one probably has the best chance of being played in Type 0 title, just because this is like another card named 7, and this one's vaguely playable. So Snakebite is potentially something to look for there. But there's no way this sees play in Constructed. It's just I think it's impossible.
But you know what we'll see play, and already has, in the people trying the Glaciella Crystal decks, this is Dario Horn. He's just a big tanky boy, and the fact that he can reactivate any forward at the end of every turn, very relevant. It kind of gives him pseudo brave. He can just keep swinging in. Really good against an ice deck if they are pushing something out of the way. Say nope, pop that up, and then he's just hard to deal with. You know, he reduces any damage dealt to him, and he can't be broken outright. So he's basically saying you have to deal with me damage, and that's special too, man. If you get Glaciella out and he starts popping off your backups or any of your big guys, like he's been a bit of a menace in the matches I've seen.
Yeah, I think that this card is pretty difficult to evaluate, honestly. I think this card just completely like one cards, Ice Lightning, and like these kinds of strategies that like require on like, you know, I have to clear it with damage, or I have to break it outright, or I have to dull it and freeze it because this card just activates itself, and then it also, you know, threatens a lot of clears with Glaciella. That being said, it doesn't really check the boxes against, you know, like decks like decks that the Wind Water deck appears to be weak against, like, you know, Samurais, for example. Like, it doesn't really protect you from that in any realistic capacity. They can just kill it, they can Kuchasable and go through it, they can just ignore it because everything's swinging for double damage, and, you know, like, they're already taking damage. The Dario is taking some amount of chip damage off of the Cyan, so I'm not really sure if this card ends up being played in great quantity. I would be very surprised if we didn't see, you know, like one or two of it in the Windwater FFB Crystal deck. But I'm not really sure it's going to be like a slam dunk kind of card. I think it's going to end up not being quite that good.
That's fair. Curious to hear your thoughts on this next one. It's Chocobo. Always happy to see a Chocobo card. It gets the most comparisons with the Alexander from Opus 12 because it basically reads 1 CP on a burst, draw a card. Well, the Alexander has a potential to get you 2 if you've cast a lot. However, this one, instead of just drawing, you get to reveal 3, and then you get to pick a character among them. Unless you're playing something super summon heavy, it's hard to imagine that whiffing. You're almost always going to be guaranteed to draw something. I don't know. Like, I don't think anything about this card reads bad. It's one of those cards that I don't think it reads poorly, but it comes down to slots. Do you slot this in? I'll let Jared answer that.
Yeah, no, I think you're definitely right. I think that there will be some, like, particularly probably loop and decks like that are going to want this card in particular. But I don't really think that, like, Ice Wind, for example, is necessarily the most well prepared to make use of this card. So I'm kind of got my eye on it. I think it is one of the better cantrips that have come out since the original, you know, Moogle and the a little bit later Poo-Poo. But it does kind of have that strange restriction of one character, and there is a lot of competition for it with, you know, the other card named Chocobo, and with Asura and Alexander in particular. That is kind of the better cantrip for Storm. It might be a case of like, well, why don't you just play both? But I'm not really sure because slots are so difficult in this game.
Yeah, absolutely. Here we have Tiamat. I know you said this was your favorite. It easily is. We've seen what Bismarck and Mione, that return to hand effect is good. But again, Win can still already do that. So it seems to have the most potential of the Chaos guys. But I mean, again, are you slotting this in?
Yeah, I think there's a very, very small chance that, you know, because it has EX burst in particular.
Yeah. For some reason. Why does this one get burst?
Yeah, for some reason. You could potentially see one of this in like Mono Win Fat Chocobo, and they just like dump it, and then sometimes it can be a damage pressure threat that they're just like, well, I can't attack them because they're gonna get the Tiamat back. So that is probably the only serious consideration for the card that I could possibly see. I don't really think it's enough to save the card, though.
Yeah, that's fair. Oh, man, Typhon must be around because I just got the sneezes. So one of the worst names you could print because Typhon's just one of the best cards Wind has ever gotten. Kind of a weird effect, too, that he removes 2 cards from the break zone, but I guess that's like his whole thing is he's just removing stuff off the field. However, he has an incredible action ability where just for free at any time, he can bounce himself back to hand, makes him great in combat, you block something, bounce him for free. Incredible trigger with Bismarck or Leviathan that, hey, for the cost of nothing, shrink that by 9,000 or, you know, draw myself a card off of Bismarck. but he's called Typhon, and any deck with Bismarck and Leviathan plays the other Typhon, so I don't know. His Snort is technically, like, the effect is great. Remove a forward from the game on demand. Sweet. Kind of expensive, though, so, like, I don't think Edgar's really even going to help that out much. You still have to pay 2 wind and something else, so... I mean, he's a neat card. It's hard to evaluate him, though, in a world where the other Typhon exists.
Yeah, so I think that there's, like, a shot, because this card has an S ability, and not only does it have an S ability, the middle action ability there for 0 just says Typhon will always come back to your hand. Like, there's no way to stop it because there's no restriction for once per turn. So, like, your opponent is never going to, like, kill this on the stack. Like, it's just not possible. You can just keep using the ability until whenever. So yeah, the lack of a restriction on the middle ability means you can always put the Typhon back in your hand, and I think that is very important. I really want to combo this card with Onion Knight. I think playing the remove from game, remove 2 at instant speed off of the Onion Knight really ups the value of this card, and that's kind of what sells me on it. I think it's a pretty straight 1-to-1 upgrade over Kadaj or whatever other Light and Dark card you might be playing in the Mono Wind Chocobo deck, because this comes in off of Onion Knight. It does kind of the same work that Kadaj does, and obviously it's not a miss for Fat Chocobo. So that's the big one. So I would be surprised if we didn't see, like, some experimentation with the card, because I think the potential is definitely there. It's not a very strictly, like, you must play 3 of the other Typhon and 0 of this one. I think there's a potential case for, you know, like a 2-1 split or a 3-1 split where you play 3 of the old Typhon and just 1 of this one. And then you aim to, if you play this one first, then use the S ability. If you play the other one first, then, well, hey, you can just bounce it with your Bismarck and call it a day. So, yeah, I think the card is solid. I like that it enables Bismarck on your opponent's turn. You know, you can declare a block with it, use Bismarck effect to deal 2k to something, and then bounce it back, and then draw a card with a Bismarck. And so it's like very, very tricky card to play around. And I think that the potential is there, because if you just having one is kind of like having as many as you could possibly want, as long as you get to that first one.
Wow, I didn't realize that it wasn't limited to once per turn. Yeah, that's freaking ridiculous that you can just, nope, you'll never kill this guy. Absurd. Yeah. Speaking of absurd, so here is Noel, Wind Legend. It was funny because this was kind of mistranslated the first time we saw it, and we all thought he did his effect when he left the field, which is like, oh my god, that's insane. He actually does it when he comes back, so it does make him a bit slower. That being said, if you can get this card going, like, he just seems crazy. A lot of people have made a big deal of he's not good till damage 3 because you gotta have haste. I think there's something to be said, and I saw a game like this. Literally, person just turn 1 Null. Do you have an answer? Oh, okay, well, now I'm just gonna start getting whatever forward I want, breaking anything huge you put out, or just dealing you damage. Like, he just seems solid. Like, yes, if they have an immediate answer, if they go cool on the stack, Brunhilde, or, you know, Amatrasi, whatever, sure, that kind of sucks, but I don't know, he seems pretty potent to me. Also, I know you're a big 13 fan, and Noel always seems to get crappy cards, so it seems nice that he finally got something that's at least good. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm kind of in a similar position on the card. It's quite difficult to evaluate. The text on the card is, if you have all of it, very, very strong. That being said, damage 3 is a kind of a high hurdle for the card to see play in a lot of the decks that would want to play it. So, like, for example, it's a little difficult for Mono Wind to say, like, or the Fat Chocobo build in particular to say, well, I'm going to play Null, and then when my opponent has dealt 3 damage to me, my Null is going to be active. Because then you're playing the Null, and you get the ability, but you're dying, and this card doesn't really prevent you from dying. It's for searching Bismarck. So I'm not really sure that the abilities, you know, like, line up exactly well with what a lot of the decks that want to play it once in their cards. And obviously the biggest factor there is the valuable slots. And so I think if you can play Null, then you're going to get a lot of value out of him. That being said, I wouldn't be surprised if this card kind of gets trimmed down over time from like a 3 of to a 2 of, because it's not as good as generating value as, for example, Fat Chocobo.
Fair assessment. So speaking of value, next we have Pinello, who was just a standout in the Sky Pirates deck with her water form. This Dancer one I have gotten to see in action quite a bit, someone trying to Dancer build, and I have to admit, it just seemed kind of underwhelming. Like, anytime they could do one of the Pinello effects, they seemed like they would rather just do the Lilith 8k to everything or dull something. it's got this kind of like, oh, well, if you've cast a bunch of cards, you can get this big effect. But we see Luso later, who also kind of does the same thing. So seeing her in practice, I was underwhelmed. Maybe there's potential for her to grow, and maybe I just haven't seen her in her best light yet. But I was definitely disappointed with what I saw.
Yeah, she only belongs in Dancers, and in the Dancer deck, she's definitely not the best card in the deck. That being said, I still think because, you know, she has the extra name, she's Win, she has the job, she has some of the synergies, well, she's probably going to get played there. She's not quite the card that I hoped that she would become when I saw her on release. That's probably the best thing that I can say about it.
That's fair. Next, we have Fujito. I was pretty high on this when I first saw it because, wow, you can remove anything from the game at any time, and he has an ability to put himself in the break zone. So you put him in the break zone, remove any forward from the game entirely. That's incredibly strong, and then you get to look at the top 2 cards of your deck, kind of rearrange him. All that sounds great to me. However, I always hear the complaints of a backup that doesn't do anything on entry. If it costs more than 2, well, this costs double the amount of 2. You are paying 4 for a card that doesn't do anything. I could maybe see it in some kind of aggressive build. Like, I don't think this is the kind of card you would want to do in a deck where you're trying to build up because you don't really want to crack a backup. But then again, it is an insurance policy of, hey, if things start to go south, boom, I just took out the best thing. So, but again, it's a 4-cost backup that doesn't do anything when you play it. And for a lot of players, that's an instant.
Yeah, I think if this card had come out like a few sets ago, there would be a chance that it would be worth the consideration. I think now, like, they just introduced cards that, like, say, for example, you know, Dario just says just kill a 4-drop, or like, you know, Avalanche just kills this, you know, when they party with Wedge. And I think it's maybe a little too slow, maybe a little too outdated for use nowadays. It could potentially be seen in like a Win deck that's light on removal in, say, you know, L3, L6, but beyond that, I don't really think so.
All right, well, I want to take you into the mind's eye of someone with this next card. Here, we can actually see the card is aware of itself. Hope's expression is after he read the text on his own card, and man, he is just bummed out. Like, you want to talk, I mean, technically this is a 4K that does something on entry. It gets you but we have tutor cards, some of them with EX burst for 3 that search you out at, like, it's just, and it can whiff potentially, like, just why?
Yeah. I think that they were very careful with this card because they saw like a lot of the other Ice Wind 13 synergies coming together, you know, with the Sarah from previous set. And they saw, like, you know, Nora and Hope is kind of Hope as a backup is a very difficult card name to balance because it has a 3 CPEX searcher from Opus 1 with Nora. And because of that, I think they made this card a little too carefully, and it just doesn't seem quite playable as a result.
You got it. There's Yagudo. He's the wind monster. We talked about those. Skip past. Archer. He's just kind of pack fodder. I don't have anything to say about him. Yep. Then we have Ricard. I mean, he's a Dragoon, but I don't think there's even any other 2 characters in Dragoons for him to have any text, so crap.
Yeah. And I don't know why they do this, but like a 4 CP 9K that says summons and abilities must choose Ricard if possible is not really like the catch-all that they think it is, I think. Yeah. It's like, well, okay, they're going to kill my 4 CP 9K now, so that wasn't really that good.
Orin and like, Charlotte have proven that it needs to be a 2 cost to be a good magnet.
Yeah, exactly.
Here we have Luso. I remember this is Chris Matisky's spoiler. You know, some of those Storm decks can just cast, it feels like 10 plus cards a turn. So if you can get there, you're paying 1 CP to not only draw a card and get a body. You're doing 8K to all their forwards, which is basically a board wipe. So if you're doing Stormy stuff, this guy just seems like he could just be bonkers. And even if you don't get the Stormy stuff and you just get the draw, like casting 3 cards, that's not tough. Or what do you think? Do you think there's any downside to it?
Yeah, I think it's an automatic, at least one of in Mono Windstorm and an Ice Windstorm. And maybe if there is an Earth Windstorm still, then in that deck too. But maybe less so because that deck has other AoE options. But he's a 1 CP forward, which means you can search him off of Stiltskin. And every Storm deck is going to be playing Northstall and it's Stiltskin because, you know, Ochu. So I fully expect that we'll see at least one of them in all of those kinds of Stormy archetypes. I think the only one that's really going to realistically be able to resolve the 7 or more multiple times is mono wind. I've said this a few times, but there really is a huge difference in the number of cards that you can cast when you play mono versus when you play ice wind and those other ones. It doesn't feel like it because we've never really had a point where after the third cast anything mattered, but I think there could be some potential upside to playing the mono wind deck now, because it really lacked luck or something really big to capitalize on. And Luso, I'm not really sure if Luso is that kind of big payoff for mono wind cast, but it's definitely an option, and I don't think it's a particularly poor option. But the cast mechanic in general has gotten just a lot better actually over the last few sets. Despite the fact that it was kind of like the best deck in like Opus 12, and it hasn't really been the best deck since then, it has gotten a lot more consistent and like Ash in general and these kinds of cards have improved their performance over time. Even though Lock has kind of come down a little bit, just the way the metagame has evolved. And I think Lucio kind of exists in that archetype as a permanent feature just because of the way, Still Skin works and that Asura can pick this up from the break zone. It's always going to be nice to have those options.
And he'll blow us all away. Sir, that is it for Wind. That is it for part 1 of the review. Stay tuned. We will have part 2, Earth, Lightning, and Water coming at you very shortly. Jared, I will see you then. Let us know what cards you like in the comments below. And until then, take care.